Welcome to episode 113. Thank you for joining us. This week, we welcome back to the show Andrew Biggio to discuss his most recent book, The Rifle 2. When Andrew returned home from tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, he had huge questions about the price of war. He decided to ask those he knew would understand, veterans of World War II. William and Nancy talked to Andrew about his book and how it delves into the suffering and complexity of war that World War II veterans experienced. Andrew reveals the darker side of the greatest generation while illuminating the struggles they endured to create a better world. In recounting the stories of these veterans, Andrew takes the greatest generation off its pedestal to demonstrate that we may have more in common with them than previously thought, wrestling with their share of weaknesses and flaws while answering the call of duty. Here is episode 113. Enjoy!
Hello, Scuttlebutt listeners. Welcome back to the show. I am William. We are here today with Nancy.
Hi, everyone.
And today we are going to speak with the author, a returning guest, Andy Biggio of the book The Rifle, and also The Rifle 2, the sequel to his first book. Andy, how are you?
Good. Great to be back on the show. I had a really good time last time.
All right, awesome. So just to get started, your book, the second one, is much more, how do I say, it feels like you have a completely different tone entirely than the first one. You speak about that in the introduction, but do you mind just preloading for our audience, talking about what was your mental approach for the second book as opposed to the first one?
Yeah, that's a good point. I even felt different writing it. I wanted to include stories of valor in the typical World War II victory stories and heroes, and I don't mean to say typical like I'm downplaying what the greatest generation was, because I included some magnificent stories right from the beginning with talking about the Battle of Peleliu with Emilio Magliocane, and then talking about my buddy Eddie Cottrell, who was a fighter pilot during the Battle of the Bulge. But I wanted this book to be different. When I wrote Rifle 1, I wanted that to be different than the millions of other World War II books already written. So I wanted to be different again with Rifle 2. Rifle 1, I interjected a lot of myself and what it was like being the youngest generation of veterans, saying goodbye to the oldest generation. And then Rifle 2, I decided let's go a little controversial. Let's go with um, some of the World War II veterans who did not live up to the greatest generation name in some of the chapters, and hit speed bumps when they came home and made mistakes. And some of them were liars, some of them were alcoholics, some of them went to prison, some of them committed war crimes, some of them witnessed war crimes. So I wanted to, again, elevate myself to a different level of World War II history, because I'm Johnny come lately when it comes to writing books about World War II.
So for clarification, what was the years that you spent writing the first book, as opposed, and what years would you spend writing the second book?
I started like doing my interviews and researching and collecting stories, I think around 2016 to 2020 or 2019 for Rifle 1. And for Rifle 2, some of those stories were already collected in that time frame as well. They just didn't make the first book. It took me like 5 years to write Rifle 1, and then it took me about a year to write Rifle 2, because I had already done a ton of traveling, collected a lot of stories, and yeah.
So do you think, I mean, you maybe touch on it a little bit in the introduction of the second book, but just your general, like, I guess, you know, a lot's happened in the years since you've written the first one and the second one, and that as I've noticed, the general tone of the United States and the average person has gone a lot darker with COVID and a lot of like the social political stuff going on. Do you think that had any impact on your not only perception of the greatest generation, but just style when writing?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's a great point. Um, great point. I've done hundreds of interviews since my second book come out, and that's a really good point. Yeah. How about even myself watching the fall of Afghanistan? From a television, working the front desk at a police station, and watching that go on the TV above me, and then dealing with whatever crisis someone's walking through the door up to the police window. Um, it was a rough. It's been a rough year. It's been a rough. Excuse me. It's been a rough few years with the protests, COVID, the pullout of Afghanistan. Um, and yes, it absolutely changed the way I see things and the way I look at my country, the way I look at generals, things like that. And that's actually why I had a gentleman who served in the German army write the foreword to my book.
So do you mind going into a little more detail, especially because that was for me when I saw who was writing that forward, it definitely made me pause for a second. What was the process of meeting this individual, and how did you convince a German soldier to write a book primarily focusing on American soldiers?
Well, I was getting ready to take 4 World War II veterans back to Germany, back to the concentration camps, Buchenwald. I wanted to show these veterans what they fought for. Some of them had never seen a concentration camp. Others liberated sub camps, but Buchenwald is a pretty big camp that's still open and serves as a museum today. And while I was on social media promoting the fact that I was bringing World War II veterans to Europe, a German historian who's about my age reached out to me and said, "Hey, I love what you're doing. I'm doing the same with German veterans. I have a gentleman by the name of Dr. Gerhard Fempel. I'd love for him to meet and make peace with American veterans. However, I do have to tell you, he did serve with the Second SS Panzer Division, and obviously the SS are notoriously known for being the worst divisions and units out there. I did my research search on Mr. Fempel, and he was a replacement during the Battle of the Bulge, um, surrendered in Vienna, Austria. Um, wasn't particularly not present that I could find historical wise being present for taking part of some of the war crimes that happened in Normandy and happened on the Eastern Front and things like that. So I said, yeah, that's fine. We'll meet with them, but the veterans that I'm bringing have to unanimously vote that they all want to meet him too. This is really up to them, not me. It wasn't. They didn't even think about it. They didn't even hesitate. These 4 veterans wanted to meet a German veteran, and when I saw the Americans meet him and watch the shaking of the hands, the hugging, the forgiveness going back and forth. One thing that struck me a lot was um, it was a B-17 bombardier named Bud Heidecke, 8th Air Force, and he grabbed the SS man by his hand and said, "I feel really awful for what we did to Germany, all those people we killed, all those bombs we dropped, and I'm so sorry about that." And the SS guy apologized for what he did, and that Bud said, I'm actually German. I have German ancestry in my blood. To think that I know I was firebombing or killing my own cousins is just always sat wrong with me. And so when I saw these men making peace 80 years later, I thought, you know what, why not give this SS guy a voice? Let's hear what he has to say. And I asked him to write the forward, and I told him, listen, not comparing myself to any SS division, but here I am watching the fall of Afghanistan, watching um, all the different stuff that has happened over the years. I enlisted in the Marine Corps. I would do it again. I love the Marines. I'd serve in Iraq and Afghanistan again. But at the end of the day, I was definitely convinced by a lot of information that was not factual and didn't pan out the way it was supposed to be. And I ran gun first into other countries and wanted to serve my country and believed everything my country said. And how much different is that than the German soldier? And people always say, well, he wasn't just a German soldier, he was SS. Well, I didn't join the Marine Corps to hug people. And so that's why I thought, staying on the basis of controversy, why not have a guy like him write the forward?
It's a bold move, and it seems to me that you had a lot of bold moves. You took a lot of risks with this second book. And the thing that jumped out at me as a really bold risk was, and a good one, was the chapter about stolen valor. And I was so impressed that you willingly shared that story. You never had to tell anybody about that at all. That could have just gone away and no one ever would have known about that. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you decided to share that?
Yeah, I changed that gentleman's name in the book, but the family ultimately figured it out anyhow. And that's like probably the biggest chunk of negativity I've gotten. But you know, this is a gentleman who nearly almost could have destroyed my reputation as a credible author, as a historian, by telling me he served with the 101st Airborne and jumped into Normandy and participated in all this stuff. And here I am parading him around Normandy, taking people's money to meet him. And when it all came crashing down and I found out he was not necessarily a total fraud, but just was never in the 101st Airborne, didn't jump into, D-Day and none of that stuff, I decided to take a look at the stolen valor aspect, and that stolen valor is not a new phenomenon, and that veterans have been lying
No,
since
it's not.
the the first days of combat. I'm sure cavemen lied about the size of the woolly mammoths they took down, and so I wanted to go into why he lied, who he was, and my experience with that, because I'm not the only historian to get burned by a veteran, by a World War II veteran. There's all sorts of stories, guys going back to Omaha Beach and shaking Barack Obama's hand and telling, everyone they were on the first wave of the 29th Division. And I mean, I've had so many veterans tell me they're in that famous photo with the Marine Raiders in Guadalcanal, the one where everyone's in jungle fatigues and like posing. I've had a few guys tell me they're in that photo. I've had people tell me they helped raise the flag on Iwo Jima, and we know all who those people were. They are named. It's been figured out, and
Right.
so I thought it was good not to just keep doing the whole honky dory greatest generation. Let's go over some guys that are no different than today's veterans who've made mistakes or did something wrong, and that the greatest generation is not perfect.
What did you learn from that experience about yourself? Maybe not. And that came out wrong. I'm not saying no. What did you learn as a historian? What did you learn about yourself? And because I thought you handled it with extreme class, extreme grace.
Yeah, because that guy, if he had just told me what he actually did in the service, I would have still brought him to Normandy. No, I brought him to Europe twice. So he's got 2 free trips out of me. His kids got free trips out of me. I got taken advantage of big time, but he had been lying since as far back as I can date, probably the 60s, of going to reunions, going to Europe himself, pretending to be, 101st Airborne and things like that. I found stuff, ribbons and medals that are very, very old, that he's been wearing them for, 5 decades, maybe 4 decades. And, he's featured in actually other books. So I learned, I guess, to forgive him, because I remember when I first got out of the military and I became a police officer, and I used to get so upset whenever I'd run as a rookie cop. I'd be working the streets of Boston, and then a homeless guy would tell me he was a door gunner in Vietnam, or another homeless guy told me he got the Medal of Honor, and and I'd be like, I'd take it personal, like, look at these scumbags lying about their service, and I'd get all worked up about it. What I learned from that particular veteran was just, forgiveness. I saw the way he was living. I saw the way why he wanted to lie and pretend to be a hero, because his life had been so full of trauma that he used this persona to get through his crappy life. And I mean, it was crappy. We mentioned he was a product of incest. We mentioned that he was a runaway from Canada, and that's all true stuff that I was able to figure out through other family members and things like that. And so, yeah, his wife was a hoarder. The fire department had to bust the windows open, things like that.
Well,
So, sorry, Nancy, continue.
yeah, we keep stepping on each other, William. Sorry about that. No, I was just want to say, kind of go back to chapter 1, talking about how open you were and the risks you took in writing this book. You were really open about your experience dealing with your own memories of combat in chapter 1. And there's a particular passage where you said, that you had this experience at work that gave you, a flashback back to combat, and it really affected you pretty deeply. And you wrote, there was only one group of people capable of getting me out of this funk, veterans. And so you started writing another book again. How can you just kind of talk a little bit? And that again is a risk, to be so open and I don't know if vulnerable is the right word, but to really lay your cards out there on the table like that. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how you are motivated to keep talking to veterans and what that does for you, and how you're generally feeling about the world?
Yeah. I remember I went to an active shooter situation as a police officer, and it was the flies that were landing on the bodies that just, wow, was like a portal. And it reminded me of the flies in Afghanistan, the flies landing on bodies in Afghanistan. And the next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. I just was so drained. The adrenaline crash was so bad. One of the worst I've ever had. And, I called a couple of police officers and told them how I felt. And it still just was I felt like I was exposing myself too much to them. So the solution to me was grab the rifle and hit the road again. And I did. I went down to DC, Maryland, Virginia, got the rifle signed, met some new veterans, and because that made me feel good. And it's funny now, I'm crossing over now to the rifle project is done. It's finished. And for World War II. And now it was such a good therapeutic mission for me, better than any form of psychiatry, any form of medication, anything like that. Was just sitting across from these guys. And it was even better when I would sit across from a World War II veteran who then became a police officer as well. Those were always the coolest ones I felt closest to. And yeah, I think that's just what it was for me. It was therapy, getting that rifle, getting names, and let's put pen to paper again and use that negative experience into positive. And I actually ended up giving $10,000 each to the victims of that active shooter situation as well for their funeral costs.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of hinted it on it a little bit. So you said the rifle project is over, and what in your book will probably be the last accounts a lot of these individuals have available to tell their story, as in within 10 years it's likely that all have passed. How do you argue that your both your first and second book have contributed to, I don't want to say myth is right word, but maybe like the narrative of the greatest generation? And to what extent do you believe that you've challenged that and to have a more dynamic presentation of this generation?
Well, I thought it was a beautiful tactic. I mean, to win a war and to get unconditional surrender. I mean, having everybody on the same page, every newspaper, every movie theater, every politician pushing the greatest generation, pushing that we need to drop atomic bombs, pushing that we need to eliminate everyone that claims they're SS, and that was the last time we really kind of won a war, so to say, won. Obviously there's the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Iraq, Afghanistan. These were all, I mean, to me, winnable wars if you use the same playbook as World War II. But, now we don't take land and own it. We don't, things that put that soldiers and sailors and Marines did back in World War II could put these guys in jail today. Politics is vastly different who's in politics. So yeah, I definitely did challenge it, and I had to challenge it for the mental health of the veterans today. The veterans today don't deserve to live in the shadows of the World War II generation and say, you're the greatest generation, I'm nothing. I mean, we all feel that way. Those guys are the GOATs, right? They're the greatest of all time. Those guys are awesome. I wrote 2 books on those guys. But at the end of the day, they were the same as you. 9/11 veterans had 9/11 as their Pearl Harbor. Those veterans had Pearl Harbor, and they joined for the same reasons, to protect their country, to serve at all costs, and wear the same uniform as their grandfathers and great grandfathers. And those guys, their problems were swept under the rug big time when it became PTSD, alcoholism, criminal activity. because today there's nonprofits that make money off PTSD in veterans. So to expose and share things like that benefits and makes a lot of people rich compared to back in the day when it was swept under the rug and combat fatigue and PTSD was looked at as cowardliness, or
That's a
coward.
that's a really interesting take on that. And yeah, as I was making some notes as I was reading, and one of the things I wrote down is how in the last chapter you say it is important for your peers, your era of veterans, to understand that even the greatest generation wasn't flawless. I think that was a really interesting a point that maybe not everybody's making, but it's the reality. They're just like everybody else. They're just like every other veteran. They have their difficulties too.
Yep, for sure, and a lot of it, I said, was covered up, and I think a lot of it had to do with everybody was a veteran back then. So there was 16 million World War II veterans that the VA says, earned the World War II Victory Medal, and they went in every walks of life. So, if some guy went into the mob, another guy became a politician. If one guy became a police officer, another guy became a biker. They were just everywhere. So nobody blamed being a veteran as a problem to a particular instance of something.
Yeah, I mean, one of the stories I've told a couple of times just in researching, he was the second leading ace in the Black Sheep Squadron. He was a Navy Cross recipient, and after the war, he was an adrenaline junkie, and he decided one of his next moves was going to be to rob a bank. And so he did, and he ended up going to jail for that. It's just that's not a story that gets told a lot, but
they think DB Cooper was a World War II paratrooper, because he jumped out of a plane with all that money and then never
that's right.
So there's all sorts of things, and then a lot of guys. If you look at if you do a lot of mafia mob research, you'll see guys were World War II veterans and things like that.
So the Rifle 2, the Rifle and the Rifle 2, the book and the rifle itself kind of took on a life of their own. Did all of that surprise you?
Yes, and I just put a Facebook post out the other day, and then I deleted it because I thought it was too corny or just like too full of myself. But I remember being in 8th or 9th grade when Band of Brothers came out, the miniseries Band of Brothers. I didn't have HBO, so I'd bring a blank VHS tape to school, and my buddy who had HBO would take the blank VHS tape and tape it and record it for me, tape it, and I think that was like every Monday, and then Tuesday he'd give it to me, and I wouldn't want to know what happened. I would want to go home, put it in, and watch it. And then, and I thought to myself, one day I hope to be able to tell the story of these veterans, because I had ADD. I couldn't sit still. So to me, sacrifice was best shown to me on feature film on the silver screen compared to opening a book and having to read a boring textbook. So I said to myself, that'd be really cool to honor these guys one day, and then fast forward however many years that was, 20 years ago, here I am hosting a panel in Washington, D.C. of the actors, followed by the following week hosting my own book signing in Boston and having like George Luzz's son in the crowd getting his book signed by me. George Luz was the radio operator in the Easy Company. And it's like, that's when it kind of hit me. Like, how did I get here? How did this happen? And it's all because of that rifle.
Why do you think people were...
Sorry, continue, Nancy.
Why do you think people responded so favorably?
I think definitely me being a veteran helps. Absolutely. I think a lot of people who are following, it's, particularly New Englanders. I can say for New Englanders, they've been following me, helping wounded veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. And then for me to move on to World War II is great. And I think on Instagram, the priceless videos of me putting that rifle in these veterans' hands again and recording their reactions and their movements at such a late age has taken over a lot of social media.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So what's your reaction been to these two books so far, not only from people from older eras, but also younger generations, millennials, Gen Zs? Have they grasped interest in this subject in your work, or do you feel like the younger generations are because World War II is now a lot of these, and like I said, in 10 years, pretty much every World War II veteran will be have passed away.
Yeah.
And as we get further removed from it, is this still a topic that's gripping America's youth per se?
Definitely. Obviously, there's been a lot of distractions with the war in Ukraine and the war in Israel with, excuse me, Gaza, Israel, whatever. And, people seeing it, live helmet cams on their, the heads definitely takes away from the old black and white stuff. But no, without a doubt, I would say I have almost 80,000 Instagram followers, and they're anywhere between 15 years old and 70 years old. And so I have a lot of mothers reaching out to me saying, my son loves your page. I'd like to get a signed book for him with a personal note for Christmas. Or my son did a book report on your book at school. And I have schools inviting me to speak at their schools, so that's really good. It'd probably be more receptive if, my project wasn't revolved around a rifle and gun violence in America. So this would probably be way better for me. But um, it's amazing how many young kids are out there uh, hitting me up on Instagram, taking part in my trivia questions or my competitions to investigate. If a dog tag was found in Europe and I posted on Instagram saying, let's help find the family member of the dog, it's all 15-year-old kids hitting me up with stuff they found on ancestry.com and the National Archives. And so I do have some faith in the youth.
If you don't mind, what have you done school visits, and what are those like?
Yes, I have. I've done multiple universities. I have a couple of high school requests on my email now. I've done Memorial Day and Veterans Day ceremonies in auditoriums in schools. And it's really cool, really receptive. You know, People forget it's actual like rifle that actually hurts people and kills people. It's covered in names now. So people are just drawn away from the violence and more into the legacies of the names on the rifle.
We're pointing at each other to make sure we don't step on the
Take it
mic.
away, Nancy.
Yeah, I'll take it away. So that's got to be invigorating to know that young people. I mean, that's a big deal. It's that young people are getting interested and ultimately getting interested in history because, as all three of us know, if we don't learn our history, we're just going to continue to repeat it and all the bad parts of it over and over and over again.
Yeah, for sure. And we're still doing it somehow.
Yep.
And we're going to be at the point where our nation's youth, I mean, even my kids are 4 and 2 years old, and while they've physically have met a World War II veteran, they'll never be able to hold a conversation with a World War II veteran like I did.
Right.
And that's kind of crazy to think about. And and I can see my kids asking me one day, hey, what were they like? What did they say about this? And what they, so and then World War II will become like World War I and the Civil War, where it's just like, oh, look at these black and white photos, and that war seems like it was 1,000 years ago, and who cares? And so.
Well,
So what do you?
Sorry, God dang it, Nancy. All right, you're up. Keep going.
We need a symbol. Go ahead. No, William, you're up.
Well, so you mentioned, this is probably the end of your World War II project. And you're right, your children may not be able to hold a conversation with a World War II veteran. maybe not even Korean War, but we have Vietnam, all other sorts of excursions, Iraq and Afghanistan. This project has taken up a lot of your time in the past few years. Where do you see yourself going, not only as a historian, but also as a writer and as someone who also interacts with veterans and storytelling?
Well, I was in DC the other day and I met a man whose great uncle was also killed in World War II, like me. And I'm giving a speech. I was hosting the Band of Brothers panel. I was hosting a World War II panel. And this gentleman, his full name is Tommy Langton, and his uncle was killed in the 87th Division. And he came up to me and he shows me a receipt on his phone. And he's like, I just bought you an M16A1, an early M16, so you can start doing this with the Vietnam vets. I said,
Holy shit.
God. We literally bought the whole gun. He's like, as long as my neighbor's the first guy to sign it in Pittsburgh. And I said, well, you just robbed me of 7 years of my life. You know what I mean? So
You better talk that over with your family.
no kidding. No kidding. And so, yeah, so I guess that's what I'll be doing.
Do you have any? I don't know, because has there been any overlap with World War II and Korean veterans? Uh,
So to me, like, chasing ghosts is a financial burden. Meaning, if I interview one veteran who served in I Company 22nd Marine Regiment that's still alive at age 98 in Massachusetts, the only other survivor from that company or even that regiment might be in Bend, Oregon, and I got to fly all the way there to get his account. Korean War veterans, combat Korean War veterans, are harder to find than World War II veterans. There was fewer of them. There was lesser of them. And, there wasn't 100 divisions that fought in Korea. There was only like 20 or something like that, maybe less than that. My Korean War history is not up to par compared to World War II, but they are virtually the same age, 5 years younger than World War II veterans. And they are harder to find than World War II veterans. So I don't, as much as I want to, I'm going to let someone else tell the Korean War veteran stories, basically what I'm saying at, because I rather get the Vietnam guys while they're in their mid 70s. So.
And
Well,
so
also-
you're actually going to start the project. You're actually going to do this.
I guess so. I mean, the guy bought me a gun. What am I supposed to do? You know what I mean?
no, he didn't just buy you a gun. I mean, like, imagine, M1 Grands you can still get, maybe for a pretty penny than maybe 10 years ago, but an M16A1, that's a little more serious firepower.
Yeah, I know. So it is going to be a little different walking into venues and things like that with that. So I'm going to have to do a whole different type of I'm going to have to think tactfully on that one and see. I'll probably have to do a lot of private roams, because that actually looks like the same weapon of war people are using today to hurt people. So
Is it like fully functioning, complete, like, or is there like missing a firing pin, or?
Well, no, yeah. So basically, he was asking me, he's like, "Hey, do you have your machine gun license?" Because those ones were auto back then. Like, I do not have my machine gun license. He's like, "Okay, well, here's one that's semi-auto." I said, "Okay, fine, let's do that." So.
Oh, so I mean, you have to give yourself credit. I mean, you've set yourself in a position where people are offering you fully automatic M16s. I mean,
People have sent me M1 Grands in the mail.
Really?
Yeah, I've gotten 2 of them.
So what did you do with those? You just have those stored, or?
I'm going to give them to each of my sons so they can remember what I did, what my projects I did. So.
Oh, wow. That's great. Well,
yes, for the audience who can't see, I've had my mouth open, just staring at the computer screen for 30 seconds. Well, that's, I mean, not a bad gig. Well, I'm looking forward to it, especially because we've had a few Vietnam veterans working at the Marine Corps Association, and as someone who has forced many friends to watch Ken Burns' Vietnam, just have a semblance of understanding of the conflict as a whole. I think future generations, especially considering what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, has a lot to learn from the Vietnam War era generation. So I certainly look forward to seeing that future project. And I guess what you said, 7 years or so, give or take.
Yeah, I think it'll be probably faster because there's more Vietnam veterans alive,
Mm-hmm.
So, but they're the average lifespan of an American male is, I think, in the 70s. So that's where they're at right now. So it's, I'm still losing a lot stories too.
Mhm.
Do you think they're going to be reluctant to talk just because of the? I know I've spoken and just recently with a number of Vietnam veterans, and the way they were received when they came back home is the most difficult memory of all for them to deal with, rather than their difficult combat experiences, which is completely different from the World War II generation.
Yeah, I've met. So believe it or not, the last week I've been around probably like 100 Vietnam vets. I went to 2 different events. I went to, Veterans Day in Birmingham, Alabama. I was at the American Veterans Center in Washington, D.C., and I was at various events in Massachusetts. And it seems like more of them are coming out of the woodwork now to want to talk about it. I think the popularity amongst them is getting higher. We have an official Vietnam Veterans Day now in the United States. Their uniforms and trinkets and hats and bringbacks on military websites are going for big money now. I think it's going to be the next, it might not be as crazy as World War II Love and History is, but that'll only take one miniseries to change that for the Vietnam guys. And then you might have this whole new wave of things. So it's definitely getting up there. It's getting up there in popularity. They are the next veterans up. They're the next old timers to look up to. And so I think it's going to be. And then, of course, the number one question asked in my DMs on Facebook and on Instagram is, "Hey, do you plan on doing Vietnam next?"
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what do you want your legacy to be?
Interesting. Yeah, I want to be known as a good police officer, a good Marine, and a great veterans advocate. And of course, ultimately, I want to be cherished by my 2 sons, so as being an awesome dad. So that's it. I don't think I want anything more.
Well, and
Yeah.
Andy, my final question for you is, now that your World War II project is over, and you've interviewed hundreds, and your whole point was, I guess, to not maybe not whole point, but a good portion of your writing was to, you know, take lessons from previous generations to then inform how current generations of veterans should handle transitions in living life. What I guess has been the premier number one lesson that World War II veterans have taught you?
Yeah, that is basically stay busy, and stay busy, stay focused. A lot of these World War II veterans told me in order to, don't sit there and dwell on the past, but just go out there. When you came home from the military, get back into college, get a career. When you start a family, have kids, raise your kids. When you finish that career, start a new career. Stay busy, active in your associations, your divisions, and that's how I've seen a lot of them live their lives. They've stayed so busy they don't have time to dwell and think about the past and to fall in any kind of hole. They've had so much responsibility, they have no choice but to keep going. I remember Bob White started running his first marathons when he was 60 years old. Other veterans,
That's
had
awesome.
3 different careers, retired from one job and started the next job. And that's what I've seen consistent with all those guys. And that's what I plan to do. So,
That's
All right,
that's great.
Nancy, do you have any final questions?
No, I was just going to say that's really great. That's great advice. And we hope you will keep us posted on what you're doing. I always like seeing. I'm one of those people who likes watching those videos on Instagram. I love hearing the stories, and I love seeing the connection that you're able to meet with people. Veteran to veteran. It's something that more of us should be doing, is making those connections with each other in person. It's really important thing you're doing, and I appreciate it.
thank you.
All right, well, Andy, for our audience, do you mind just telling them where they can find you on social media, how they can purchase your books? Holiday season's coming up. I purchased your first book for my grandfather-in-law last year, so I probably have a pretty good idea what he's getting this year. But do you mind just telling our audience that?
Sure. You can find Rifle and the Rifle 2 on Amazon or at my website, theworldwar2rifle.com. And you can follow me on Instagram at The Rifle and Facebook, The Rifle.
All right. Well, Andy, thank you again for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. To our audience out there, you heard them, know where to find them, know where to get the books, help a brother out. And thanks. And we'll hopefully hear from you all again.
Thank you.
A common axiom is that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Another axiom is that we sweat in peace so that we don't bleed in war. Here at the Marine Corps Association, we fully understand both. That is why we offer through our professional development page on our website a comprehensive catalog of battle studies, tactical and ethical decision games, and war games to ensure that not only do we learn from the past, but we embrace the thoughts and decisions that influence the outcomes of some of the greatest actions of the Marine Corps. We have tools and techniques that will enhance both unit training as well as enable comprehensive self-study. Check out all that the Marine Corps Association has to offer on our website. Go to mca-marines.org/professional-development. That's mca-marines.org/professional-development and get your reps and sets in.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am William Truding, but you've also heard the voices or contributions of Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Lichman, retired Frazier. The opinions expressed in this episode do not reflect the official stance of the Marine Corps, DoD, or Marine Corps Association.